Good morning, everyone, and welcome to U.S. Department of Agriculture's Climate Hub Network webinar on climate challenges and solutions for the Caribbean region. I'm Andre Bradley, the coordinator for the International Climate Hub, which is a fairly new USDA resource with tools, programs, and initiatives for international users that you will be learning more about today. I am joined by Bill Gould, the director of USDA's Caribbean Climate Hub, Dr. Diana Guzman Colon, and agronomist Silmarie Crespo Velez. These will be our presenters for today's webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to share some information on logistical items. You can choose either the original audio selection to listen to this event in English, or you can choose the Spanish channel if you prefer that. If you miss that option in the beginning or want to change languages later, choose More, and then Language and Speech, and then Interpretation Language. There is also sign language interpretation available. You can also turn on live captions by selecting More, then Language and Speech, and selecting Turn on Live Captions. Now, for those who might need this in Spanish, I will attempt that, so bear with me. Puede elegir la selección de audio original para escuchar este evento en inglés, o puede elegir el canal en español si lo prefiere. Si no vio esta opción al principio o quiere cambiar de idioma más tarde, elegir más y luego idioma y voz, después idioma de interpretación. También hay interpretación disponible en lengua de señas. También puede activar los subtítulos en vivo, seleccionando más luego idioma y voz y seleccionando activar subtítulos en vivo. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me on that. Also, please feel free to type any question you have in the chat. We might pause to answer those written questions as we go, but if we don't worry. We have reserved a significant amount of time for discussion and questions after the presentation. Because of the small size of this webinar, we have enabled cameras and sound, so please feel free to put your cameras on and ask questions that way as well. We'd like this to be as much of a discussion as possible. This webinar is the second in a series of 4 aimed at the unique challenges that climate change is posing to agriculture in the Caribbean region, and it will be an in-depth look into the great resources that Bill Gould's team has developed, which is a set of Caribbean adaptation guides for tropical agriculture and forestry. While this webinar series is a joint effort between the International Climate Hub and the Caribbean Hub, we want to extend a special thanks to Katie Woody, the director of the Foreign Agricultural Services Caribbean Basin Agricultural Trade Office, and her team for recognizing an important need in the region, which bears disproportionate effects of climate change. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bill Gould, to get us started this morning. Bill, if you would.
All right, thanks, Andre. I'm the director of the Caribbean Climate Hub, as Andre mentioned. I'd like to thank Andre and our partners with the International Climate Hub and the Foreign Agricultural Service for working together on this collaboration to present this material. And I'd like to thank all the participants that are here today. Welcome back, those that may have joined us last week when we had a little bit of an overview of the Climate Hub network and the work of the International and the Caribbean Climate Hub. For those that weren't able to join last week, just a real brief overview of the Climate Hubs. They're a USDA program. The Department of Agriculture is one of the bigger departments within the federal government and has lots of capacity among the various agencies in terms of science and delivery of programs. And the Climate Hubs were established really to help our department integrate climate change science, climate change research, and climate change solutions across the many agencies within USDA. So just an example here today, I'm with the USDA Forest Service, Andres with our Foreign Agricultural Service, and we're doing our best to integrate that capacity and bring it to the customers and clients of the Department of Agriculture. The Climate Hub Network has 10 regional hubs, and our International Climate Hub And each of those regional hubs really focus on the regional science related to climate change. What are the regional projections? What are the regional vulnerabilities and risks? And how can we reduce those? And our goal in each of the regional hubs is really to threefold: provide some synthesis of that science, provide tools and information that can help in decision support, and to serve as an engagement agency, really bring people together where they can hear this information, they can allow the department to get feedback on what the needs are of our clients, and provide support to address those needs related to climate change. So today we have two of the staff from the Caribbean Climate Hub, Diana Guzman and Silmarie Crespo, and they're going to share one of the what we consider a tool in a way. It's really a support for making decisions for folks that range from the decisions at the farm level to the level of a municipality or to the agency level, various programs. And they're going to share with you this this guide, not only the process, but some of the informational material that is part of this guide. And I think our goal really is twofold: to give you a sense of how we use this to deliver support from the Department of Agriculture. But also, I think a lot of the information that we have developed for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands is really relevant to other people and organizations around the Caribbean. So we hope to share the process with you, and also the some of the products associated with this guide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Diana Guzman to introduce the material for today. Diana.
Thanks, Dr. Gould, and thanks everyone for your time and attention today. I'm going to be with my co-worker, Silmarie. We're going to be talking about this project, as Bill mentioned, about the adaptation guides regarding tropical farms and forested land in the Caribbean. So I will be focusing on the tool and the process of creating workshops and co-learning with the audience. And I'm going to pass it over again to Dr. Gould so he can go ahead and give you a little bit of context about adaptation workbooks and why was this tool created. Bill?
Sure, thanks, Diana. So the Climate Hub Network is about 10 years old, and a couple of the first actions of the network were really to understand what the vulnerabilities were in each of the regions across the U.S., and then to try and determine what sort of material information would help people making decisions that could help them address those regional vulnerabilities and reduce their risk to climate change. And what came out of that was a process that you will see described by Diana and Silmarie of working with people or with organizations to help them understand what their climate issues are and connect solutions to addressing those vulnerabilities that they might apply, and also understanding the kinds of USDA programs that might help them address those risks. And what we learned over the last 10 years, sort of exploring this process with groups of different sizes, is that it's really important that you have a connection with folks that you're working with and that you're sharing this information with. So initially, this adaptation workbook was created in our Northern Forests Climate Hub and focused on adaptation of forest resources in the northern parts of the U.S. And we understood through working with our partners that not everyone connected with that. There was a lot of information about climate change, but it wasn't really relevant to their regional situations. And so there have been a number of permutations or adaptations of this process with folks that are working with, for example, climate adaptation in urban forests, climate adaptation in the Hawaiian Islands, climate adaptation as it relates to to agriculture in general, climate adaptation for tribes in the U.S. And in the Caribbean, we realized that a lot of the information about climate change was related to the temperate regions, to the continental United States. And so there was kind of a disconnect between our customers and partners and that information. So we took advantage of the concept of this workbook, this adaptation guide, and went through a long process to understand better the local needs and develop this workbook so that would be applicable to tropical forestry and agriculture. And so this is a tool that's really built on 10 years of work across the climate hubs in all the regions to come up with a really useful decision support mechanism. And hopefully, we'll see that evolution continue as we share that with you. We'd love to hear questions and comments, and we hope to have a good discussion after the presentation of Diana and Silmarie. So Diana, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. So to give you a little bit of context about what's happening in the Caribbean in terms of climate change, just like many parts of the world, we've seen a pattern of the number of days of hot days per year increasing, as well as the air temperature surrounding the Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. And of course, that has that poses certain challenges, and we can start seeing several patterns related to these increases in temperatures. One of them is the changes in rainfall patterns. Sometimes, most of the time we can get the same amount of rain yearly, but when we look at the rain that we are expecting during different dry and rainy seasons, that has changed. So that poses challenges for planning for adaptation. When we think also about these changes in pattern, we're also seeing a trend towards more dryness. So we are seeing that there are more prolonged droughts through the past 10 years, and also an increase in intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. We just had an event not too long ago, about 2 weeks ago, where the first seminar of this series had to be canceled because we just had this quick emergency. So that, as you know, with this project, we wanted to take this information from the scientific literature, from all the models, and figure out a way to communicate through this adaptation workbook. Also, we wanted to gather information about the concerns related to climate change from the public. And Silmarie, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so we wanted to gather information from the public and from the people who will use this workbook. So we went in with the idea of co-development with continuous feedback from farmers, ranchers, extension agents, and other stakeholders. And the purpose of this adaptation guide was not, or is not, to tell people what to do, but rather serve as a tool to support objectives that people already have with their projects. And we support those objectives by providing context about climate change and how the impacts might affect their agricultural or forestry projects. And so we use a 5-step adaptive approach management framework developed from the Northern Forest workbook. And we will frame this presentation on these 5 steps. So we gather information through workshops. We visited farms. We created draft resources. And so within those farm visits, within those workshops, within our informal conversations, we also gathered feedback on our draft resources. So these resources were validated too by experts in the field. Silmarie, if you can go la próxima. All right. So like I said, we had informal conversations, and after taking all of these notes and transcripts from our conversations, we codified the text to get at the frequency of mentions within 3 categories. So we identify needs, challenges, and impacts that came up on our conversations. Próxima. And within these 3 categories, within the needs, we identified that people were very interested in learning about water conservation and management. Again, related to the patterns that we are seeing of dryness, of prolonged drought, of rainfall patterns. People wanted to understand too the climate change scenarios. So, the models can get complicated. The models, people, the general public need to understand what these scenarios mean for them. And then in terms of challenges, again, related to drought, people wanted to learn more about how to deal with prolonged drought, how to deal with these rainfall changes, and how agencies and extensionists can support those working with drought and working with water conservation. And unrelated to climate change, they also mentioned they wanted some way to learn the different options for financial assistance. They wanted more support from policymakers regarding markets and regarding assessing that need of giving more value to the local product versus the products that we import. And then in terms of climate change, people wanted to learn more about, again, drought, water management, and extreme heat, and how can they manage that in their projects. So taking that into consideration, we decided to create 12 publications, Próxima, 12 publications with different purposes. The main adaptation workbook, a quick guide, and 10 fact sheets or guides per sector. And I'm going to hand it over to Silmarie so she can talk about the tool per se and all of these resources.
Real quick, we're gonna first show you like a glimpse of what the manual workbook is. Quick question, can you see the adaptation guide document on the screen? Perfect. So this is the adaptation guide. It has information including trends, effects, and implications of climate change in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, meaning St. John, St. Croix, and St. Thomas. And it also has like a series of worksheets based on the 5 steps. As an example, I'm going to show you some of the pages. So here is an example on how does climate change affect the Caribbean. It has like a scientific context, maps with information of the different life zones, and then a series of maps that indicate the expected changes in temperature for for the half century, and also maps with changes in rain patterns to the half century, meaning 2041 to 2016, more or less. The manual also has fact sheets or worksheets that are going to be used along with the 5-step process. So people can use it individually, service providers can use it with their farmers, agronomists can use them for different types of purposes. And although going back to these trends and information on climate change, although it's specific to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, we have a lot of life zones, geography, topography, similar to other islands in the Caribbean. And so they may serve as an example for similar projects to be carried out in other parts of the Caribbean archipelago. Also, we have a shorter guide, which has like the blank documents. For the purposes of these presentations, I'm going to show like the blank pages that are in the bigger manual, which is this one. But this is what you will find in the shorter version. 62. Which is a set of worksheets that go part on part with each step of the adaptation workbook. And it helps guide the process of planification to include, change, or work around different practices that can be included in your farm project, forest project, land management, etc., etc. So this is an example. This is like a vulnerability assessment that the person or the group that are working with this project can do to know how vulnerable they are to climate impacts and what capacity they have now to attend said climate impacts. And they also have like a guided session. Other than the workbook, we also, as Diana mentioned, we have the fact sheets, the guided fact sheets. We have 10 in total. Today we're going to show the beef and cattle fact sheet, but all of them have like the same themes in them. They all have like a context of how specifically each sector is going to be impacted or is being impacted by different climate change effects. And they also have how to adapt or different type of practices that can be used depending on the management goal, depending on the climate vulnerabilities, and each specific project that is being used. So what and finally, we also have the case studies. Right now, we have about 5 case studies, which are examples of practices on farms around Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So what is the dynamic of this adaptation 5-step process? It's that both the manual and the guide are based on a 4 5-step process, and each space, which each space, land, or farm project has unique characteristics, right? So they all have different geography, soil types, climate, among others. This process does not treat, the thing about this process is that it does not treat adaptation practices as a general recipe with general practices. The idea of these guides is that they consciously and if they help to consciously and efficiently plan which practices may be ideal, taking into consideration climate vulnerabilities, the landscape, and other things in mind. And the steps begins with defining the goal of the project and defining the physical and climatic characteristics of each project or landscape. Then it goes through a vulnerability analysis, taking into consideration climate impacts of the land or the project. And by analyzing how vulnerable the project is to these impacts, the initial goal then is reevaluated, and then you can begin to look for those practices that fit to that specific space and conditions. And then after taking into consideration what practices may be best for that space and that context, there is the fifth step, which is to monitor whether these practices are effective, how effective are they, and if they need to be changed, edited, or maybe the goal needs to like have a change in some way. And right for this, each case study and the purpose of these guides, they all go through the 5-step process. And we have these case studies like to help be an example of how to go through the 5 steps. And the case studies collect the experiences of farmers who have in one way or another gone through these 5-step planning process and are incorporating practices and monitoring how effective they are or whether changes need to be made. It is very important to take into consideration that the planning process begins and works with the management of goals of each farm project or each forestry project. As an example, Dale and Yvette from Seja Farms in St. Croix, their goal is to aim develop local food in the Virgin Islands and to preserve land and water in order to have food security or food sovereignty, right? And how this 5-step process is going to help this goal be achieved, taking into consideration the climate impacts that are projected for the future is very important. So with this case study as an example, after defining the characteristics of the land and going through the vulnerability analysis, although they did not change their goal, they did consider impacts of dry periods followed by intense rains to choose their practices and further evaluate them. And here you can see an example of 3 practices that they chose by doing this planification process, but they were already doing that.
All right, I'll take it over from here. So in addition to the case studies, we offered several workshops where we partnered with different collaborators because we wanted to reach a diverse set of audiences in different parts of Puerto Rico and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And although the workshops had their own objectives, their own learning objectives. Silmarie, if you can go to the next one. We also took it as an opportunity to observe and gather feedback from the whole 5-step process. To the next one, please. And we wanted to learn how people interacted with the material. We wanted to learn what language to use, how simple can we talk about climate change so that people can understand what are the patterns, how climate change manifests in their projects, in their land, and what type of actions can they do. So several of these learning objectives were increasing knowledge of climate scenarios, just as those were the gaps that we identified before designing these tools. Another learning objective was for them to familiarize with how climate change manifests itself on the ground, on the projects. And finally, to build skills to make informed decisions given the specific vulnerability of each project. So we had 9 workshops, and at the end of the workshop, we sent out an evaluation asking several questions regarding the audience's knowledge before and after the event. And here I'm gonna just highlight a few of these questions in this talks, but hopefully we're gonna be working on a paper where all of the questions are going to be looked at and see all of the results. So be on the lookout for that. So for the first question, we asked the audience to rate themselves on their knowledge about climate change and its impact on agricultural lands and forests before the workshop and after the workshop. And on your left, you can see the results before the workshop, and on the right, you can see the results for after the workshop. And the question had a Likert scale from 0 knowledge to full knowledge. And so before the workshop, we had a variety of knowledge levels. And by the end of the workshop, most people felt like they left the workshop with intermediate to full knowledge about climate change and its impact. And then the next question was about rating their ability to identify their own vulnerability and the impacts of climate change on their projects. And you can see that the distribution on the left before the workshop is pretty normal, no? But then after the workshop, the distribution shifted from moderately confident to very confident. So people felt like they were able to identify climate vulnerabilities and their impacts. And then the next question was, we wanted to know what was the greatest concern about the impacts of climate change. And it was almost a tie between droughts and temperatures. Again, just like our informal conversations, drought and the rising temperatures came up as the biggest climate change impacts, or at least of greatest concern. And then the next one, we asked the audience to rate themselves. Oh, sorry. That's yeah. So we asked if we asked the audience if they changed their goals after a climate vulnerability assessment, and most of the people, or more than half of our audience, said yes, they did change their goals after learning about their own climate vulnerabilities. And so on this question, we had an open box where they could tell us about why had they changed their goals or not. And you can see some of the supporting quotes here. Some person said, no, I didn't change my main goal, but however, I did learn that the climate makes us, or climate change makes us more vulnerable, in this case to heat and drought. And the person who changed their initial goals after learning about climate vulnerability said that after the workshop, they felt like some of the conservation practices that they had implemented caused several crops to fail, and now they know how to prepare so that this doesn't happen again, and they know how to self-evaluate their practices or self-monitor the practices and be aware of their results so they can keep on working on adaptation. And so for the next slide, we tend to finish, or we always finish our workshop encouraging people to think about the long-term process of adaptation, because when thinking about building resilience towards climate adaptation in our farm projects or forestry projects, we need to have in mind that the adaptation requires a series of actions that requires some degree of change. So we in our workshops and in our tools, we always conclude with this message of thinking about, a transition towards adaptation to these new conditions. And with that, I left some links on the chat where you can go ahead and visit our website. There you can find all the links to the materials. And I do want to acknowledge our co-authors, Dr. Luis Rodriguez Cruz, who was involved in the first portion of this adaptation workbook creation, Dr. Nora Alvarez Berrios, Wanda Crespo Acevedo, and Dr. Bill Gould, who is here with us today. We also had guide reviewers from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and Agriculture Extension Service. And I don't want to end this talk without giving special thanks to all the farmers, land managers, and others who really talked to us, welcomed us into their farms, into their projects, and participated in the workshops, and also provided valuable input on their experiences and their knowledge. So we tried to gather all of that feedback and have it in our adaptation workbook and in our case studies. And with that, I invite you to follow us on Facebook and visit our website, and our YouTube channel is full of other examples for different conservation practices that other farmers are doing as well. So thank you so much, and we are going to be here open for questions.
Well, thank you, Diana and Silmarie. We'd love to have some questions and discussion. I believe we can raise hands, turn your videos on, or provide questions in the chat. I do want to mention that this is relatively recently completed, this guide. We're still getting some of the guides translated into English from the Spanish versions. But those 10 sectoral guides that Silmarie described are really the core of the information that we can provide, and they have lots of links within those guides to particular programs, incentive programs or support programs from our USDA agencies, and also to literature and other guides and online resources. So we mentioned the one on cattle, but there are also guides on small ruminants, coffee and cocoa. I probably can't list them all out. Maybe Diana or Silmarie could help me out and share what those 10 guides are. But we're very open to hearing thoughts, comments, and questions on this. It came a little bit out of a frustration that all of the information developed for farming and forest management in the temperate zone just wasn't connecting with folks in the Caribbean. So we feel this is a way we can have a conversation with farmers and forest managers here, and better be able to share that kind of information that's available. And we see this tool as something that we can use within our staff, but also that folks working with extension, folks that work in the other USDA agencies, folks that work in other countries could adopt it, adapt it, and use it to serve that purpose, to really connect people with some of the climate basics or specific climate information and solutions for their regions. And with that, let's leave it open to questions. I saw a hand up. And I don't see, looks like that hand went down. If you have questions, you can drop those in the chat. Raise hands or just open your microphone.
Bill, I'm gonna
Yeah.
share in the chat the list of the fact sheets by specific sectors, so people have them in hand. The cocoa, coffee, fruit trees, forested lands, at least.
Okay, I do see a hand up from Keith Felipe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Greetings, everybody. My name is Keith Philippe, and I'm representing the Bahamas. I have worked in the El Yunque National Forest for a month there with the International Institute of Forestry there. So it's great to see Puerto Rico represented here. Culebra is amazing also, I must say. But anyway, is there a reason why the long-term projections were focused specifically on the period between 2041 and 60?
Yeah, those projections that we shared came out of a project looking at downscaling some of the global projections for our region. So they're based on a particular analysis and publication that looked at that mid-century as a target. And that's the best that we had for our downscaled information for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. There are projections towards the end of the century, and also not just in terms of temperature and precipitation, but sea level rise. There's a variety of potential analyses that we could look at. In this case, we wanted to use that kind of scientific basis from those publications from this particular downscaling work.
Okay, yes, thank you so much, William. And then the final question is, with respect to the publications you've presented, I think it's about 8 of them or so, 8 or 10 of them or so. Are these available for public access, or because I was able to get the adaptation workbook downloaded, but the others were a little bit more difficult to find. So if you could point out a resource, maybe drop a link in the chat group or something, so that we could kind of start getting ahead with what you published.
Sure, we've made most of them. The Spanish versions are available online. We're still working on the translation for some of the English versions. And in parallel, we're getting them ready for hard copy publication as well. But we're making them available through our website, and we'll maybe post again the links in the chat for accessing those online.
Yeah, most of the resources, or almost all of them, actually all of them are translated already. We're just making sure that everything it's in the same format and all that, but they are quite ready to be published soon. But I did send a link to the chat to where it says Caribbean Climate Hub Climate Adaptation Guide's website. That's where everything is going to be available for the public. At the moment, if you go to the Spanish session, everything should be listed there, as well as in the English version. But when we have everything designed, then we'll make an announcement for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. I will keep an eye for hands up. So I don't guarantee I see everything, so feel free to speak up. I do want to mention that we're also interested in working with organizations that might see some opportunities for using this guide or the process in their own work with farmers and forest managers. So we're happy to, facilitate some train the trainer activities or work through the guide with folks. Yeah, Benita. See a hand up.
Hi, good day, everyone. So I heard you mention that you're willing to work with organizations, but is this still for the U.S. Caribbean, or it's extended beyond the U.S. Caribbean?
Well, the guide itself is focused on Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the climate, particularly that downscaled climate information, the specifics of that are more relevant to Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. However, a lot of the solutions in those 10 guides that we have are very relevant to similar agriculture throughout the Caribbean. And so, I think it would be a matter of getting familiar with the guide, seeing if, maybe there's potential to use it as is, maybe it it can serve as an aid to other sorts of engagements that you might be having in other countries.
Well, based on what the presentation highlighted with the droughts and the flooding and the forest fires, those are experiences that Guyana has. And a lot of farmers have been affected in the past few years from forest fires as well as flooding that caused the market demand and prices to skyrocket recently because of a lot of farmlands being damaged. So I think it can be useful, and I'll be sure to review it with my team and probably send the team an email if we need anything changed or if we would like to make adaptations to that document, how best we can do so. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Anita.
I see a hand up from Natalia. You might be on mute, Natalia Lugai. Well, she might be working on the mute there. I see a question from Tamika Seals Manzano, and feel free to, you can contact myself, Diana, Silmarie, all of us work together on the Climate Hub. Maybe Silmarie, you might want to drop our emails in the chat so folks would have those. And Tamika also added for specific locales. I think that, feel free to get in touch with us. We are collaborating here with the International Climate Hub and the Foreign Ag Service folks, and we're also housed at, as Keith mentioned, at the International Institute of Tropical Forestry in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So if there are ways we can, perhaps connect you with people or resources in other parts of the Caribbean, we're more than happy to do that. Let's see, Diana or Silmarie, if you guys see a hand up or anything, you can alert me.
I don't see any hands at the moment, nor comments on the chat or questions.
Okay, well, really appreciate everybody that joined.
Sorry, yeah, we have one. Sorry.
Okay.
Gail says in St. Kitts and Nevis, we're experiencing the same climate change issues. One of our main concern is recharge of our aquifers, I think it's one. And yes.
Thanks for sharing that, Gail. Yeah, as we had lots of conversations with farmers and land managers as we developed this, and the challenges are not new. I mean, farming is all about climate-related challenges, but in many cases, it's the pace or the unpredictability of some of these challenges, the unpredictability of seasonality, and the solutions sometimes are finding out ways you can get a little bit of an edge on some of those challenges. Can you maintain your water supply a week, 2 weeks longer, retain that in your soils in some way that'll help you get past some of the drought activities. So we do share a lot of challenges, and we look at this as an opportunity for us to also to learn from our partners around the Caribbean. I see 2 hands up. Lodorai Bracero is one of our Climate Hub team members. Lodorai.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and congratulations for the presentation, Diana and Silmarie. I wanted to just ask how replicable you see this in other regions, since you're already applied for Puerto Rico. And I think it would be beneficial if you can describe the challenges, right, that you encounter to apply and collect data and talk to the farmers in order to apply this concept of the adaptation workbooks in Puerto Rico for the rest of the hubs. So if you could share those experiences, because I know that you learned a lot from all that process. So just some highlights, if you don't mind. Thank you so much.
Sure. Maybe I'll share a couple of things that relate to a little bit to the work of the climate hubs in general, in that we realize there's lots of interest, lots of science, lots of research related to climate change that often doesn't connect with farmers and ranchers and forest managers on the ground. And often that kind of work and information comes from government entities. There may be issues of trust or lack of communication among those agencies and people. And so one of the, and I think that's a similarity throughout the Caribbean. There's a lot of similarities in our agricultural activities where we need to put some effort into building some mechanisms and bridges so that we can address those questions from the farm level about what are some practical steps that are addressing climate change, but also helping support sustainable business practices. And it's difficult to separate some of those decisions about how to invest in climate adaptation from the general sustainability and economic success of farming operations. So we kind of see this process as a way to integrate information about addressing climate change with those general objectives and decisions that folks are making about their farming operations. And I think that sort of connectivity is something that's needed across the globe, really, in many cases. And so there may be some lessons learned from this work, for other agency personnel working with climate change issues in countries around the Caribbean. I see a hand up from Adrian Trotman.
Yes, hello. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, and I think you started to touch on it a little bit in your last discourse. So how does, when you talk about adaptation and particularly reducing risk, I think I came on a little bit late, but I heard you mention, you talk about the 2041 to 2060 projections. How much does the short-term information where we provide early warning information from season to season, how does that fit in to the climate hub and being able to reduce risk, but on the shorter term in helping us to understand what's the likely variability with respect to the seasons, particularly the two main seasons that we have in the Caribbean, wet and dry. How does how does information on that scale, on that time scale, fit in to the decision-making process in your forestry or even on your farms, as opposed to 2041 to 60, which is not here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And our use of that information about climate projections out to the mid-century was really an attempt to provide a little bit of a climate change basics to this process and to bring into it some information about climate projections and what they mean in the sort of midterm there, and use that to sort of frame the discussion as people go through this process and think about their own objectives. I think we also do work with those short-term forecasting and projections. We integrate a lot of information from your organization in our bi-monthly drought updates that we put out for our region with NOAA and the National Weather Service. And I think there's a space also in that discussion for bringing that in to the conversation with people about how they can use those more near-term forecasting in their decision making. And perhaps I'll pass to Deanna or Silmarie just to see how that has come up in their conversations with farmers as they go through this process, because it's it's part of the kind of cost benefit analysis if you're going to implement a practice to reduce drought. The timing of that, the whether you need to be aware of what's coming up in the next season in terms of, it could be not just drought, but also a flood likelihood, storm likelihood, those kind of things. And I think there's space for that kind of information, in this conversation that this guide helps to develop. I'm not sure, we haven't sort of codified, how that would go into the process, but that's a good point to bring up. And maybe Silmarie or Deanna, if you guys have had any experience with questions from folks about that shorter time frame, maybe you could share those.
Sure. I first wanted to, I know that I asked about how portable is this process, no? And for me, I think that the framework, the 5-step process is pretty flexible. It's flexible enough that it can be adopted into different modules, into different types of work, into different projects. So that's what I like about this adaptive management process. And in terms of the challenges that Loderai asked about, we are fortunate enough that people are really open to listen and to hear what's going to happen with our climate scenarios and how climate impacts are going to be affecting. They're open to that information because we are islanders and we experience a lot of that, like the rise in temperature we're expecting. Again, seeing the climate scenarios, we are expecting up to 3 degrees of 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit of minimum temperatures rising. So that type of information, to get at the question of Adrian, that's pretty important, especially for the area where the farmer is working at, because farmers already know they are really the scientists here. That's how I call them. They know how the climate has changed for the past 20, 30, 40 years, and they already know the patterns that they're probably going to see. So when they see these scenarios and when they see that the science matches with what they are experiencing, then they're like, wow, I see these maps, I see these scenarios, and what I'm doing in my land is going to help me adapt into the long-term process. Or maybe I need to change because in my life zone, let's say, I'm going to be expected to receive less rain. So how do I adopt different conservation practices for what we are going to be experiencing in 2050 or in 2040. So it's a matter of we use it as a tool, these scenarios as a tool to demonstrate the models, talk about the models, knowing that they're not perfect, but they are the best information that we can offer. And so talking in a simple language has been very valuable for us, and it has led to conversations about some underlying challenges that not necessarily have to do with climate per se, but more policy-wise. Sometimes policy, local policy or state policy is behind of what we know in the science. So the gap between the farmers saying, okay, I need this practice and I need some assistance, sometimes doesn't match what the policy says at the moment. So it is very important that people are informed and people can have the tools to talk about climate change and talk about their policymakers and their representatives in government so that they can, bring that what they're experiencing in the field, match it with our information about the scientific part, and then get it out into their groups and into their political field. So that's how I see the climate scenarios being important here.
Thanks, Diana. I just posted a response to Gail about a good question, in that there are multiple risks related to climate change and extreme heat and hurricanes are a couple of them. And so it's really a matter of looking for solutions across the spectrum in society, whether we're looking at our built environments or natural environments. And just some examples, we've had discussions with ranchers on the dry side, southwestern part of Puerto Rico, where they're thinking about planting shade trees, but they're aware that, trees and hurricanes don't always mix well. And so they've been asking for solutions about, what would be the appropriate tree species for creating more shade in their pasture and with less, with more resistance to hurricane. And so we've had, there's a number of folks interested in silvopastoral practices, and that's part of the conversation in that group, trying to balance trying to be as holistic in thinking about our adaptation responses so that we can take actions that both help us adapt to climate, maybe also be mitigating future climate. Can we integrate carbon capture into some of those solutions? So it's a complicated problem, really needs kind of holistic thinking that ranges from changing building codes to making sure that the kinds of tree species we might recommend, are they available on the market? Are they in the nurseries? Those are all sorts of scenarios that need to be addressed at the same time in order for people to practically be able to apply some of these adaptation solutions. Thanks, Kanisha, for that comment. I'll give it a second here, see if any more questions or hands come up. I see Adrian commenting further on those short-term forecasting and the value of those and the need for those. We have had discussions in Puerto Rico on social media and various platforms about rainfall and about the contradiction between the projections of potential drying in the Caribbean and then these intense rainfall events that we do have. And in Puerto Rico, we're not seeing a real significant trend in annual rainfall, and kind of teasing out the seasonal patterns and the trends and how they vary geographically has not been an easy task. There's not a lot of publications and scientific research that we can point to that identify trends in rainfall. However, a lot of the anecdotal information and conversations with farmers is that, yeah, this is a major issue that they're dealing with, this unpredictability about the length of dry seasons, the timing of things. And so regardless of what the projections might indicate or the trends in annual rainfall, there's a definite need for improving soil health practices, methodology that capture and retain water more effectively. And so it's kind of part of the ongoing conversation in Puerto Rico about climate change and the difficulty in predicting rainfall patterns. And I'm sure that's not unique to Puerto Rico. So I think doesn't look like any further questions. I want to really thank Diana and Silmarie for your presentation with us today, and a reminder to those that have joined us that we will have a presentation in 2 weeks at this same time. And we'll share, this will be more of a variety of climate adaptation solutions in different sectors in the agroforestry, using technology and drones. And we'll share an agenda for that in the upcoming week or so. And I want to thank Andre and the International Climate Hub and the staff and our interpreters as well. Looks like Andre's back on camera if you want to say anything.
I just want to say, thank you all for joining. Thanks to the presenters. This was the second installment in a 4-part series, and we look forward to having you all join us in 2 weeks when we continue on with part 3.
All right. Take care, and wish everybody a good week upcoming. Bye now.